How's it going, everybody? My name is Scott Moss. I'm an engineer at Udacity, also a co-creator of Angular class, where we do Angular training, mostly here in San Francisco, sometimes New York and stuff like that. And I love Angular. Been using Angular for some years now, and it's just like my go-to. It's my thing. It's my jazz. It's the bee's knees. So I love it. So I want to talk to you guys about using now ES 2015. That's the name of it now. I guess it's like a continuous thing, right? So I want to talk about why you should use it and some of the features that meshes well with current Angular 1.x and some of the gotchas when using some of those features. So let's dive right into it. So why? Why do we want to use ES 2015 other than being left behind for a month until something new comes out? Because that's how it works. Well, ES6 spec is final. As of last week, it's final, it's done, right? So it's coming. So if you've been thinking oh yeah, it's not ready, I don't really care. No, it's here. So it's done. It's okay, there's no more of that. And ES7 is already in the works, and we're gonna use some of those features today. Angular 1.x is going to be here for a while, so doesn't mean you should forget about it. And if you want the experience of writing, with newer things with your current Angular applications, this is another reason why you should use ES 2015. Build tools make it easy. There's so many tools out there. I mean, Go Broccoli, Webpack, Lunch Pack. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, you can pack your lunch in broccoli. I don't know. It's just so much stuff. Fits nice with Angular. It does. It fits really good with Angular 1.x and Angular 2.0, of course. Features to help speed up development time. So yeah, some of the features that ES 2015 has adopted help speed up development time, similar to CoffeeScript and stuff like that. And if you use it, you're going to help spread adoption, right? As a community, if we start using these things and everybody else is going to start using them, we start building plugins in this ES 2015 and so forth and so forth. So the faster you do it, the faster your peers will do it, and hopefully everyone's going to be doing it, right? Peer pressure. Staying current for now. So in our world of JavaScript, I don't think there is a thing of staying current. But at least you get the sense of that you're current, until somebody comes out and is like, no, this is stupid. We're going to use WebAssembly now. There's no such thing as JavaScript anymore, right? You guys hear about that? So transpilers, right? What are transpilers? If you use CoffeeScript, you used a transpiler before, right? So converts our ES 2015 browser, boy, that's a typo, converts your ES 2015 to ES5 code ready for browsers. It can use experimental features not yet implemented. It's another typo. As you can see, I wrote that really fast. So yeah, we're going to use a transpiler to convert our ES 2015 down to something that our browsers can read, right? Just like CoffeeScript. You can't run CoffeeScript in a browser, and most of the features in ES 2015 you cannot run in certain browsers as well. So my favorite one that I recommend is Babel. I think some people pronounce it Babel. I'm not sure if it's Babel or Babel, but that's the one. All right, so that's the one that I recommend. All right, it's pretty good. Tracer is another one. The difference between the two, in my opinion, Babel, the thing I like about it the most is the code that it spits out. It seems like something a human can read, and Tracer spits out something that looks like Chappie would have to read or something like that. So I'd rather read what Babel has. And they have stuff for better experimental features and stuff. Dude, let me get this out the way. Okay. Sorry about that. So, build tools. System.js and JSPM. They work together. They're two different things, though. So, it's a true universal dynamic module loader. This is the way that this is the preferred way that I think people should use ES 2015 today. It's a lot of setup compared to some other tools we're going to talk about, but it's definitely the way to go. And Angular 2 has adopted it, so you should probably do it if you want to stay current for now, okay? Plugin system. It has a pretty robust plugin system that, it's pretty active right now. It's getting better. So things you want to import HTML templates into your JavaScript and CSS and stuff like that. It has a pretty good plugin system. It's compatible with Babel and Tracer. So you can pick and choose your battles there. And JSPM uses System.js internally. So JSPM is just this package manager that sits on top of system.js, and it like actually does some of that configuration for us automatically as we install our packages. So it's a really good match. And like I said, it's an awesome package manager. So JSPM allows us to fetch packages from GitHub, NPM, Bower, wherever you want. And it's going to use a shim similar to like AMD modules. So you can convert things that aren't ES6 modules into ES6 modules and incorporate them in your application. So it's pretty awesome, but it's a lot more setup than some of the other tools. But this is definitely the recommended one. So the other one that I like is Webpack. Webpack is awesome in its own right. It loads and bundles modules for you. That's pretty much what it does, but it treats everything as a module. So anything and everything is a module. And it has a really nice plugin system. In fact, the only reason I would use Webpack today, and I still do sometimes, is that its plugin ecosystem is a lot bigger than JSPM right now. But I mean, that was the case for Gulp and Grunt too, so that's gonna change, right? Like you just can't stay current. Yeah, they have a really nice plugin system. Like for me, I like Stylus. There hasn't been a Stylus plugin for JSPM yet, so I use this, or I could just make a Stylus one and stop being lazy. But yeah, so Webpack is cool. It's easy setup, a lot more easy to set up than JSPM. It's super simple to set up. Little configuration, and it's also compatible with Babel and Tracer and a smorgasbord of other things. So there, of course, are other build tools out there, Broccoli, Gulp, and you can use Gulp with Webpack, and God, so many combinations. But yeah, but these are just some of the newer ones that I want to talk about specifically for ES 2015. Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of using ES 2015 with Angular. Is there a clock up here? Okay, there it is. Great. So classes for controllers. So we talked about, or Dan Wallen talked about in their last talk about like classes with ES6 and TypeScript. So I'm going to talk about how to use those right now with Angular 1X and like why they're useful and some of the gotchas. Can everybody see that? No. Okay. Okay, that doesn't go bigger. It's on 200%. Okay, hold on. There we go. There it is. Okay, you can see that? Yeah. Sweet. All right, people in the back? Yeah, all right. Okay, so here's a class. This is how we write a class, right? This is how we're gonna do it in Angular though. So what's the thing to note here, we have this constructor function that they talked about a little bit. This is the function that's gonna be called when you new this class. So this is where we handle our DI, right? So anything you want to inject into your controller that you normally would, you would just pass into your constructor here, right? So HTTP, whatever service, same thing goes. And then methods that you want to apply to your controller. So if you were using the controller as syntax, which you should if you want to stay current, right? This is how you define a method, right? This is the new method shortcut for classes. So there's no comma necessary here. You just define your method, and you can inject your arguments here. And then what's cool about this is that the this in here is the this out there. Does that make sense? Hey, it keeps the context, okay? So if we reference this inside of update, it's the class. So that's pretty sweet. And here's an example, or a better example, I guess. Here's an example of how you would use it with like a directive, like a component. So we imported our controller from this file up top, and then we're just gonna make a directive. And as you can see, we just put our controller here. I left a little comment that says, no need to use key value pair if the value is the same name as the key. We're gonna get into this feature a little later too. So I didn't have to say controller, semicolon, controller. It's because the controller is the same name as the property. And we don't have to do that in ES 2015, saving us a little bit of little keystrokes there. So we'll get into that. So yeah, that's pretty much controllers as classes in ES 2015. So some gotchas, because there are some gotchas. It's not always sugar. Where did I put that? Add your dependencies to the context for use. Oh yeah, so here's the thing in ES6. This is not the case in TypeScript because they have the public thing. So you have to make sure that when you inject your dependencies into your constructor, that if you want to use those dependencies in your methods elsewhere in that same class, that you need to bind those dependencies to this. Otherwise, you cannot reference them. So as you can see, I injected HTTP, I bound it to this, And now I can reference it as this.http. But my service, this will actually throw an error because I didn't bind it to this, right? I do that all the time. I mean, you're gonna run into it when it throws an error, but just to let you know, just make sure you bind it to this. Unless you're using TypeScript and you use the public, and then it's totally fine. Cool. Got some time. Modules. Modules are awesome. So let's talk about this for a little bit. So I think this is probably the single most important feature in ES 2015. Like when I saw this the first time, I was just like, yeah, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. So like I'm super stoked about this whole feature. So this really works great with Angular's module system. I mean, there's some conflict sometimes. We'll talk about that. But it actually works pretty well, and it gives you a lot of flexibility and how to organize your applications and pick and choose where you want to do things. So as you can see here, we're taking the approach where everything in Angular is a component. We're taking that component approach. And what we did was we composed our component of these individual modules that we define elsewhere. And then we just imported them into our component definition file where we register our component on a separate module, and then we export that module. So if we just walk through some of this stuff here, you notice we're importing a CSS file. So we have this CSS file defined somewhere else, and depending on what tool you're using, via JSPM or Webpack, and however you have that set up, the expected behavior here is, because I don't have a variable after the import and before the string there, is that this CSS is going to be loaded into the DOM for me, probably in a style tag in the head. So that's super awesome. We don't have to write that CSS anymore. It just gets loaded up. That blew my mind the first time I heard it, or the first time I seen it. And then we're importing Angular. We have this ng animate from Angular animate here. And then down here, we're importing our controller from this file called main controller. And then we're going to alias it as the variable controller so we can save some keystrokes below. And then we're also importing our template from the template file. So we're actually bringing in our HTML file as a string, and we can just place it right in there as a template, and we don't need to use template URL anymore. We just load up the template as a string and just place it in there. It's pretty cool. That way you don't have to, write this huge template in your directive anymore, if you don't want to do the cache, or you don't have to write like a script, inside your index.html to write your template there. So it's a little win, but it's pretty awesome. And then we're loading up this child module from this module here. And then registering it is pretty much the same. We have this ng animate, this child module. Since we placed those inside that array like that, you can assume that ng animate and child module are both just strings. They're not actually the actual modules, they're just the name of the modules. And that's why we're able to do that. This is the pattern that Angular follows now. All their third-party modules, well, not third-party, but all their accessory modules like ng animate and stuff, when you require them, they're just strings, so you can easily register them like this. There are times where you just actually want to export the module itself for like testing. Sometimes I just want to poke around on the module inside of my test, so I'll actually export the entire module and just not the name of the module. And then you can just say module.name in here instead of module. So there are times for that. And then down here, we just register our component. We have a template and we have a controller. That's it. So that spits out an object that has a template property whose value is template, and a controller property whose value is controller. That's the shortcut for that. It's pretty awesome, because they're both the same name. We have this template variable up here, and its property is called template, so we don't have to do the thing, and same thing with the controller as right here. So as controller, controller. And then we just export our main module. So I think that's pretty awesome, especially if you get into the component approach with Angular. This just becomes a habit. Like you don't even think about it anymore. It's pretty cool. Oh yeah, and then this is what I was supposed to talk about. ES modules allow us to have even more options on how we organize our Angular applications. There are many approaches when choosing how to handle the relationship between the two module systems. And we'll talk more about that stuff. If you're coming to my workshop later on this week, you'll see some more. Cool. So gotchas with the modules. Like I said, it's always going to be gotchas. Everything's not copacetic. You cannot conditionally import things like require. So something I really liked in Node, so you can if env is development, require this thing, or if this, require this. You can't do that with import. You can't conditionally import something. You can't do it. It's not part of the spec. And it must be at the top of your file. So you can't import something after you've written some code and expect it to be there. This thing, the imports are going to be ran before anything else. So they have to be at the top of your file. You cannot interpolate or use variables for import sources. You just have to write the string out. So here's an example of all that stuff that I just said. So this is valid. Import Angular from Angular, legit. Import utils from utils, OK. If utils.something, import other from other. That's not going to work, right? And Node.js, require statements, that'll work. We can do that. We use require. Yeah, we'll conditionally import that thing, synchronous. And then down here, later on in some code, inside this factory, let's just import Lodash down here because this is where we need it. That's not going to work. You have to put that at the top. And if you don't believe me, try it. Cool. Arrow functions. Who here used CoffeeScript before? All right. Pretty much the same thing. But now it's a standard. It's ES 2015. It's current for now until they come out with like triple arrow function or like something ridiculous. So we made a service called API right here. It's just a factory. It's just a service and it injects the HTTP. So a common thing is, var this equals that, or you'll have like this huge pyramid of .bind, 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 right? And you're just passing in this. It's kind of annoying. You're doing all this asynchronous programming. You have these set timeouts, these callbacks, and you're just binding everything, especially if you're doing like functional programming and you just like, going down this stream of like functions that like mutate stuff. It's just like, it's not fun. So they invented this, or they learned from CoffeeScript and adopted this arrow function stuff, which is pretty awesome. So the way this works is we can use the arrow function as a shortcut for the function keyword, pretty much. But it also does some other stuff with this. So the first example, we have a method called getData, and we set its value equal to this parentheses here with the resource. This is the argument. This is just imagine these parentheses is the function keyword and the parentheses that follow that word. So typically you would see the word function before this parentheses. We just got rid of that function keyword, it's gone, right? And we're just gonna put the argument we're defining, which is called resource, followed by an arrow function. And then we open up our brackets. So what this does is, one, it creates an anonymous function for us, and two, it also keeps the context. So this, inside this function, is the same thing as the this that the URL is bound to. It's the same context. It's equivalent to calling .bind on this method, or saying var that is this, or whatever you want to do. So that's the long way to do it. So we can, if we had more arguments, we would comma separate this just like any other function, multiple arguments. The other way is down here. If you look on this promise resolution on .then, we are doing it in one line. So this is really awesome right here. Because we only have one argument for this callback function and its response, we don't have to wrap it in parentheses, and we don't have to, I didn't do it here, but we actually don't have to put it on another line. We could just, I have a better example somewhere, but we could just do this on one line. We could get rid of the return statement, and whatever follows the arrow would actually be returned for us. It's pretty awesome. I think, yeah, I'm going to have some more of that later. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. This is another way to do it. So the rule is, if it's just one argument, you don't need the parentheses. You can just, and then if you only have like one line for your expression following, you can just put that in there and it'll automatically be returned for you. But if you have, multiple lines, then you need to open up these brackets and do your stuff and then return it later, just like you would in a regular function. Yeah, there it is, inspired from CoffeeScript. So yeah, saves you keystrokes, keeps the context. Pretty awesome. So the gotchas, some big gotchas in Angular, really big. I've seen people do this. I've helped somebody debug this for like 3 hours before, and I couldn't figure it out until I was like, oh yeah, I see now. Okay, so you gotta be careful when you use it. You will have unexpected side effects when using it in certain places like controllers and services. So yeah, like arrow functions are cool. So you're probably thinking like, I'm just gonna go in my app, take away all the functions, and just put arrow functions, right? It look cool, right? You get to do it. You get to feel cool. No, don't do that. You're gonna break some stuff. I'm telling you. It's just like when people thought like, oh yeah, let. I'm gonna get rid of var, everything, and put let. You're probably gonna break some stuff, right? So here's an example of what's gonna break if you were to use this. So I'm just gonna use this. I'm just gonna use this arrow function here for the callback for my service, right? And if you use a service, service uses the this word. It's a newable function that's going to be called by Angular. So if we follow the rules of what arrow function is going to do, then what is this inside this service now? It's whatever is on the outside, right? It's not some new encapsulated context. It's something else. It's not a new object, right? So you might have some unexpected side effects, especially on the outside. There was a this.url, and now you're like, no, this.url is this now, right? So you might have some stuff messing up there. So totally think about that stuff before you start putting arrows everywhere. Another good example is controllers. This is where we have problems with. Whereas, they had their state and they were defining like a one-off anonymous controller here to do like some resolve blocks on the data. Yeah, this wouldn't work either. I mean, what is this now? Right, nobody wants to deal with this. Everybody hates this. Nobody wants to deal with this. So don't just go putting, arrow functions everywhere. Okay, these are some of my favorite ones. Object property and method shortcuts. These are pretty legit. This is what we were seeing in some of my examples. So we use this import statement. We're importing from the to-dos file, and we're grabbing all these properties here. And then all we're doing is we're returning a new object that has a getAll property, which is a method, an update method, and a remove method. And like I said before, we didn't have to do the key value pair thing because the name of the property is the exact same name of the value that is created up here. So the rule is, as long as that variable exists in a scope that is reachable by the object that you're creating, you don't have to do the key value pair thing. Just put the same name there and you're good. Comma separate it. Super legit. Saves you a lot of time. The method shortcut, really awesome. So just like in a class, we can create methods like this on all of our objects. We can just say, getAll, and we use like this invocation type syntax that we do for our objects, followed by the brackets, and then we can put our functionality in here, and so forth and so forth. The only difference is with classes, we don't have to comma separate them, but within objects, we still need to comma separate them. So just remember that. You will get an error if you don't remember it, I promise you. So don't worry if you don't, it'll tell you. So gotchas. When compiled, method shortcuts vary in functionality depending on what you're using. So what I mean what you're using, I mean like what transpiler you're using. So they may diverge from the actual spec. I've seen Babel actually transpile those shortcut methods differently than what the spec wants. So you might have some unexpected side effects. So what I would recommend is, because of these inconsistencies, you may not want to use like recursion for these methods. I've had trouble using recursion for this stuff, and I haven't looked into the details, but I think it has something to do with the naming of the function versus it being anonymous and stuff like that. So be careful with that. You shouldn't just be using that everywhere, so be wary of that. When using method shortcuts with classes, you don't need to separate them with commas, but you must in objects. We went over that before. Destructuring. This one's pretty legit too. Here we go. This is probably one of my favorite ones. So destructuring is just a way for us to the way I think of it is like to pluck values from an object or from an array in one line without having to say var some variable equals object.variable. You don't have to do that. So right now, inside of this resolution here, on this then, we're inside this callback. Normally we would just say response here, and then underneath it we'd be like, all right, now return response.data.map. Or we could just skip that, and we could just say, we can use these brackets, and we can just say data. What that's saying is, give me the data property of the thing that's going to be passed in. Just give me that. I'm making a variable called data, and I'm going to associate it with the data property on whatever is going to be passed into this callback. That's what that shortcut is saying right here. And then down here, when we start doing some maps, this is where it gets kind of tricky, because the syntax looks exactly the same, but it's doing two different things. So down here where I'm saying let name created at content equals item, what I'm saying is, I'm making a variable called name, I'm setting it equal to item.name. I'm making a variable called created at, I'm setting it equal to an item, I'm making a variable called created at, I'm setting it equal to the value item.created at, and the same thing with content. And then down below, like I said, it's the exact same syntax. You see these curly brackets separated by commas. I'm actually creating an object with those properties. So now I'm creating an object that has a name property whose value is this name. I'm creating a property that's called created at whose value is created at, and so forth with content. So the syntax is the same with the curly brackets and the commas, but two different things are actually happening here. So it's kind of hard to grok at first. You're just like, I don't know. I'm just going to use the old way. But trust me, it speeds things up when you start doing a lot of functional stuff, for sure. Cool, looks running out of time here, so some gotchas. You cannot use destructuring and DI and dependency injection. You just can't. Just don't do it. It doesn't work. I mean, if you know how Angular's DI works, right, it parses it out literally with a regex on a string, so you just can't do that. You cannot use arrow function one-liner with destructuring in your arguments. So what I mean by that is, the rule was for the one-liners and arrow functions, if there's one argument, you can just skip the parentheses and just use the arrow and return whatever is next. You cannot do that with destructuring. That's not going to work. Yeah, it's one argument, but now you got these brackets here and you're like screwing everything up. That's not going to work. I don't think that's in the spec either. I don't think that's coming. So you guys forget about it. And yeah, do not do destructuring in a DI function. Cool, decorators. This is probably one of my favorite ones. This is actually like ES7 type stuff, but you can use it in like Babel. Probably Tracer too, I'm not sure. I don't use Tracer anymore. But decorators are awesome. I use these a lot. So we can use decorators now, just like we had view and component in Angular 2. We can use that stuff now, right now in Angular 1. There's nothing stopping you from using it. And in fact, I use them all the time. So like, here's a simple debounce decorator to debounce this method on the class. And I'm just, hey, debounce this thing for 300 milliseconds. Super easy, right? Here's another one to memorize things. I want to memorize this expensive function that computes expensive things with the same stuff, right? Super awesome. Here's another thing. You want to do type checking at runtime, but you don't want to use TypeScript? You can do type checking with decorators too. It's pretty awesome. I've done it before. Yeah, you don't get IntelliSense and all that cool jazz, but you get type checking at runtime. So now you don't have to write unit tests to see if this thing is an object, so it saves you a little bit of time. And decorators are an experimental feature that you can use. So like this alone, I mean, this just looks awesome to me. So should totally look into it. So right now it's just a proposal, but it's not finalized yet, but it will be soon, hopefully. Gotchas, it's experimental and not finalized. It's ES7 spec. Only works with classes. You cannot just decorate everything in your code. You can only decorate things in classes, methods and stuff. The transpiler must support it. Babel definitely supports it. Not sure if Tracer does. Maybe it does, I don't know. I can't guarantee that, I'm not sure. Placing is important. You must place these decorators above the target that you're trying to decorate. You cannot just, put them willy-nilly in your code and expect it to know where to go. Like, you got to put it above the thing. Cool. Other notable features: let and const, async functions, really awesome. Maps and sets, and their weak versions. Rest params and spread, very similar to the same stuff in CoffeeScript, super legit. So last bit, resources. ES 2015 REPL at the Babel site. You guys saw it earlier, on an earlier talk. Really good places to go try out ES 2015 stuff. Turn on the experimental flag, get crazy, see what happens. Feature lists and examples. So repo of just like all things ES 2015 and examples of what they look like. I studied up on this a while ago. It's a really good resource. Great blog on all things ES 2015. This guy writes an amazing blog about everything ES6, and he's actually writing a book. I think it's like open. It's an ebook that you can download now, early preview. JSPM, Webpack, ES 2015 and Angular 1X starter by Angular class. So we made a starter repo for people who want to get started that has like a task that will generate components for you just by running a gulp task. It'll generate tests, all the files, the CSS, everything for you whenever you want to make a new component. And the same equivalent for a starter for Angular 2. So we have the same thing, but for Angular 2 to help you get started in your projects now. So use ES 2015 nows and before the other thing comes out, because it's going to come out. It's probably about to come out right now, like as soon as we leave. So there we go. That's it.